Pennsylvania is one of the best states for roller coasters. You have such a diverse mix. You have 16 different wood coasters. This ranges from some of the oldest coasters in the world to modern marvels. Then you have multiple hypercoasters, launch coasters, and looping coasters to appease all tastes. I have ridden every single coaster in the state except for a few kiddie coasters, so in this video, I will rank the top 35 coasters in the Keystone State. Before starting the list, I have two things to note. One, I will be including a few defunct coasters I experienced over the years. Two, you can find separate reviews for many of these rides on my channel, including everything in the top 12. Number 35, Rollo Coaster at Idlewild. This is a miniature version of Boulder Dash. This PTC wood coaster takes place on a wooded hillside. It is a very scenic location. The ride is understandably tame given the park it's located in, so don't expect much in terms of airtime. But there are some laterals when you change direction, including some pretty strong sustained laterals on the far turnaround. Number 34, Steel Dragon at Waldameer. This Mauer SC2000 spinner may be a clone, but it is a solid ride. I love that initial drop if you experience it going backwards. Then you get some good spinning if you have an off-balanced car. The brakes in this one can slow you down at points, which hampers the pacing. Number 33, Laff Trakk at Hersheypark. This is the same layout as Steel Dragon, just placed inside a themed box. You have these giant multicolored cutouts that add some fun visuals during the ride. Then if you go on it during Halloween, the entire ride takes place in total darkness. The brakes do hit harder on this one, but the added visuals more than compensate. Number 32, Exterminator at Kennywood. This is yet another spinning coaster, except this is a Reverchon model. This one has a dark and eerie sewer theme. You have some hairpin turns with laterals at the start, some zippy drops midway through the ride, and a second half loaded with spinning. While the layout is more straightforward than the prior two spinners, this one spins far more and that's extra disorienting in the dark. Number 31, Kingdom Coaster at Dutch Wonderland. The original CCI wood coaster has a unique blue paint scheme, and it's a solid ride too. You get a few weak bits of airtime and a helix finale with some fun laterals. This would be a perfect first wood coaster for kids, yet it somehow has a higher height limit than a lot of the state's other wood coasters, but I digress. Up next would have been Wildcat Hersheypark. GCI's first coaster is now being transformed into an RMC hybrid. This ride was far from perfect, mainly because of how rough it rode, but I always found the front row tolerable. That made it possible to appreciate the twisted layout that threw in some underrated pops of airtime. While the ride was far more comfortable with the Millennium Flyers, I thought it ran faster with the PTCs, and the airtime back then was particularly potent. Number 30, Sooperdooperlooper at Hersheypark. This historic Schwarzkopf was one of the first rides in the world to feature a vertical loop, and it's still the signature element. It induces some strong Gs. The rest of the ride does a lot of meandering, but it does have a neat setting rumbling over pathways, along a hill, and over a creek. The ride does finish strong though with a forceful helix, and it tracks very well for a ride of its age. Number 29, Merlin's Mayhem at Dutch Wonderland. This looks like one of the Vekoma suspended coasters, but this is S&S's take on the genre. I love how minimalistic and freeing the restraints are. It makes it feel like you're flying. The layout isn't too intense, but the helix has good Gs, and there are some nice visuals as you dive into a misty tunnel, pass over the sky ride, and go past fountains. There's some nice theming in the station as well, plus onboard audio, although the latter is a bit tricky to hear. Up next would have been Stinger at Dorney Park. This Vekoma inverted boomerang wasn't here very long, and it was often closed, but if you want to know what it felt like, you can still go out and experience in Vertigo at Kings Island. The initial drop has a bit of a freefall sensation to it. Then you have three very forceful inversions you experience going both forwards and backwards. The positive Gs try to rip your legs off. There's some headbanging, but it's not as bad as an SLC or an older boomerang. Number 28, Skyliner at Lakemont Park. This wood coaster is famously located next to a minor league baseball stadium. It is a really cool backdrop. The ride itself has seen better days. The first valley is brutal, but the others aren't too bad at least. Skyliner looks unassuming, but it starts off strong. The first drop and ascent into the first turnaround throw you right into the buzz bar. The rest of the ride has just weak pops of airtime by comparison, but you ride this coaster for the first two elements. Number 27, Thunderhawk at Dorney Park. This old wood coaster is a decent ride. The turnaround is the biggest strength. You get some strong pops of airtime plus wonderful laterals. The ride isn't too strong around that. It's smooth, but the outward legs hills are profiled pretty gradually. Then the return leg is neutered by a trim brake, but you may still get some light airtime up front. Number 26, Flying Turns at Knoebels. This wooden bobsled took many years to build, but it offers a one-of-a-kind experience. It's smooth as glass, and the turns in the second half have some wild swinging. It's not the most forceful ride, but it's all about the visuals and novelty. Number 25, Comet at Hersheypark. This Herb Schmeck classic is pretty tame up front, but the first half has some good drops in the back. The second drop in particular will try to throw you up into the buzz bar. The ride does fizzle out in the second half due to a trim brake, but it's neat how this coaster was wedged into the park, and it's still very smooth despite decades of operation. Number 24, Wild Mouse at Idlewild. This Vekoma Wild Mouse is weird, but it's one of the best rides of its kind. You have a tilted lift hill followed by a larger and more involved layout. It's not a cookie cutter ride by any means, and the forces get stronger as it goes. You get decent airtime in the dips, and the tight turns offer crushing laterals. Just beware that final break, it is a doozy. Number 23, Possessed at Dorney Park. This is an enjoyable intimate impulse coaster. The layout is simple, but effective. The initial launch has some yank to it, but the spikes are the highlight. You get weightlessness at the apex and blasts of positive Gs at the bottom. Unfortunately, the holding brake is no longer used though. That used to be the best part. Number 22, Impulse at Knoebels. This Sear Tower coaster looks like a Gerstlauer Eurofighter. You have a vertical lift and vertical drop. The latter gives some strong ejector airtime. The rest of the layout has a mix of inversions and positive Gs. Most valleys will pin you to your seat. Then you also have 4 inversions. You get a pinch of hang time on the vertical loop, and then some incredible hang time on that barrel roll, especially because you're restrained by just a lap bar. The helixes aren't too exciting, but the ride is running quite smoothly with those new trains. Number 21, Hydra the Revenge at Dorney Park. This is a peculiar B&M floorless. It is surprisingly deficient on positive Gs and whip, but it does other things well. The first drop has some great floater airtime in the back. Then I like how floaty some of the inversions are. The 0G roll and corkscrew gracefully levitate you from your seat. Then the ride starts off with a JoJo roll that hangs you into the restraint for seconds at a time. Number 20, Appalachian Express Mountain Coaster at Camelback Mountain Resort. This aquatic development alpine coaster is above average for the genre. It is a nice long layout. You can get some good speed on this one, and there are some little bumps giving bits of airtime. Number 19, Jackrabbit at Kennywood. This wood coaster is all about one moment, the double down. You get a free fall sensation as the track drops out from beneath you, and it's accompanied by some incredible airtime, especially because you have just a seatbelt and a single position lap bar way above you. There isn't much else to the unconventional layout, but it does take place in a ravine, and it's quite smooth for its age. Number 18, Leap the Dips at Lakemont Park. The world's oldest operating coaster has modest stats. Its biggest drop is just 9 feet or 3 meters tall, and its posted top speed is just 10 miles per hour or 16 kilometers per hour. Yet, this ride has a mean streak to it. The dips offer some of the most unique airtime in the world. You have 0 restraints, so you're repeatedly paddleboarded into the air. The sensation is more intense in the back row, but it is very rough back there, but I think it's worth it for that airtime. Up next would have been Blue Streak at Conneaut Lake Park. This was one of the jankiest coasters I ever experienced. It looked like it was about to fall apart, and subsequently, some of those valleys were downright violent. But the back car had some spectacular ejector airtime in the outward leg. You were thrown against a buzz bar, and the seat itself would come up and spank you. While the return leg was far tamer, it was tucked among the trees. Number 17, Lightning Racer at Hersheypark. This GCI wood coaster has a solid layout on its own. You have some decent airtime pops peppered about the twisted track. But what makes this ride special is the racing element. It is so picturesque and exciting how the two tracks twist in unison, and there are countless flybys along the way. The ride has developed a bit of a shake, but it's still pretty smooth all things considered. Number 16. Racer at Kennywood. This racing wood coaster needs to be experienced in the back car. There is some great airtime back there. The third and final drops in particular have some really strong airtime because you have just buzz bars here. Then you have a few smaller pops along the way as well. Then you have the racing element. It is neat being able to slap hands with the other train, and you won't know until the final turn who's going to win the race. Up next would have been Laser at Dorney Park. This Schwarzkopf now runs on the German fair circuit as Teststrecke. This double looper has a near identical layout to Colossus at Lagoon, excelling in both the lateral and positive G department. The first drop has some good whip and laterals. The back-to-back vertical loops were very forceful, and I typically start to gray out. Then the transition after these loops had some shocking laterals. The coaster then finished with some decently forceful helixes, and all this took place with just a lap bar. Number 15. Talon at Dorney Park. This B&M invert has the usual start with a solid drop, a moderately forceful vertical loop, a graceful 0G roll, and an OK Immelman. But then Talon does its own thing. You have a decent helix and a sneaky drop with some floater airtime. Then you finish strong with a snappy corkscrew and a leg-numbing 90-degree turn. While it doesn't have the power of the older inverts, it is a smooth and creative layout. Number 14. Thunderbolt at Kennywood. This classic wood coaster has an unconventional layout. Built on a ravine, the ride has a few sizable drops before the lift hill, and then the ride saves its two largest drops for the end, both of which offer some nice airtime in the back car. Then the middle section has some of the best sustained laterals of any coaster. You have this minimally banked helix that dips up and down. The laterals are so strong that single riders are not allowed. Number 13. Skyrocket at Kennywood. This Premier Rides launch coaster has a strong first two-thirds. The initial launch is decent, and I love the ejector airtime over the top hat. That is followed by a forceful overbank and a 0G roll with some intense hang time. The second half starts with a great drop in the back, and a corkscrew with some more hang time. But the finale really fizzles out. You have some boring S-bends and rather weak bunny hills. While the trains are a bit cramped, the ride does at least track flawlessly. Number 12. Fahrenheit at Hersheypark. This feels like Intamin's attempt to build a Gerstlauer Eurofighter. You have a beyond vertical drop with some thigh-crushing airtime. Then you have 6 inversions. I'm not a big fan of the Cobra roll, but I love the 2 high-speed corkscrews and the unique Norwegian loop. Then towards the end, the ride throws in an ejector airtime hill that seems fit for a hypercoaster. Number 11. Great Bear at Hersheypark. This B&M invert has a quirky layout, and I like it. You start with a forceful helix high above the ground. Then you have an enjoyable drop and 4 forceful inversions, all of which are snappy. The first 3 are large and run along the midway. The final one occurs in the return run when you're whizzing over the creek. It is a really neat visual. It's not the longest invert, but it certainly packs a punch. And even after 2.5 decades of operation, the coaster is running super smoothly. Number 10. Oscar's Wacky Taxi at Sesame Place. This Gravity Group wood coaster is a great little ride. It's frenetically paced and just keeps throwing one airtime moment after another at riders. Some of the other small-scale Gravity Groups have a bit more forceful airtime, but I love how there's no downtime on this coaster in between elements. It just keeps popping you into the air. Just know this ride is notorious for being closed or having delayed openings. Number 9. Steel Force at Dorney Park. This Morgan Hyper gets more flack than it deserves. You have some giant hills at the start with some nice floater airtime, particularly in the back. Then you have a speedy turnaround with some decent laterals and impressive head choppers. Then you have a strong return run. The mid-course trim isn't too harsh, so you get floater and flagector airtime in the return run. That's especially true because the lap bars give a ton of room even on the lowest setting. Number 8. Twister at Knoebels. The spiritual successor to Elitch Gardens' Mr. Twister has a cool layout. It's a twisted mess with great pacing. The ride is heavy on the turns and chock full of laterals, and they're weirdly at their best between the 2 lift hills. The ride also has some sneaky airtime mixed in. The large 2 drops at the start give nice floater airtime in the back, and the entry into the first turnaround gives an ejector pop up front. Then the final few hills also lift you out of your seat, and the ride is running smoother than ever now. Number 7. Steel Curtain at Kennywood. This S&S creation is the record for the most inversions of any coaster in the United States. Some offer hang time like the initial Dragonfire dive loop, others offer inverted airtime like the 0G stall. Then many have good positive Gs going into and out of them. But this ride has some variety too. You have fluid and decently forceful transitions, plus a few spots of airtime. Number 6. Storm Runner at Hersheypark. This is the country's best intimate accelerator coaster. You have a powerful hydraulic launch with one of the fastest accelerations in the world. It'll leave your stomach behind. Then the rest of the layout is far more diverse than the other accelerators. You have a top hat with some great ejector airtime. Then you rocket through Pioneer Frontier. You have 3 inversions, most notably the Flying Snake dive that starts off with a hang time filled barrel roll and ends with a disorienting twisting dive loop. Then you also have some additional airtime pops as well for variety. Number 5. Ravine Flyer II at Waldameer. This Gravity Group wood coaster is wonderful. It starts with the setting. The ride is located atop a hill and plunges down a ravine. Then you cross a highway not once but twice. The elements are fantastic too. The first half is particularly strong. You have one of my favorite drops out there between the view and powerful airtime. Then the bunny hills each have sustained floater airtime. The second half loses quite a bit of speed when you climb back up the hill, but you'll still get some airtime pops and lateral jolts. And Waldameer has the ride running smoother than ever with all the recent track work. Number 4. Candymonium at Hersheypark. America's newest B&M Hyper is one of the company's best. Because you don't have a brake run until the very end, this ride has great pacing. Every hill in the first half offers very sustained floater airtime. The second half's airtime is not as sustained, but it's still decent, and you also have some fun visuals as you traverse an outward banked hill and wrap around the beautiful Kisses fountain. And as you'd expect, the ride is glossy smooth. Number 3. Phoenix at Knoebels. The reigning Golden Ticket Award winner for the world's best wood coaster benefits by some unreal restraints. You have just a buzz bar and no seatbelts, so every airtime moment will launch you a foot into the air. It is incredible. You get airtime on every hill, and Phoenix gets stronger as it goes. The final 4 bunny hills in particular are one of the best sequences on any coaster. You are repeatedly slammed into the lap bar. I always come off this ride laughing, and the park takes pristine care of this ride. It is so easy to marathon. While this coaster cannot match the raw intensity of the coasters above it, Phoenix is a special ride. Number 2. Skyrush at Hersheypark. This intimate hyper is one of the most intense coasters out there. I know a lot of people hate the lap bars. Yes, they are tight, but I love how exposed they leave you. They accentuate the ride's already ridiculous forces. The first drop is one of a kind. It starts with a powerful burst of ejector, and a kink midway down springboards you even higher. Then the camelbacks all offer more sustained ejector. Then the turns and S-hills offer wicked laterals that effortlessly fling your torso sideways. And the pullouts and low turns pile on the positive Gs as well. This ride is relentless. And coming in number 1 is Phantom's Revenge at Kennywood. This hyper coaster is a true terrain coaster that goes down a ravine. That second drop is legendary between its airtime, length, and views. Then the coaster rips through the rest of the layout. You have great positive Gs in the subsequent pullout, and that turnaround as well. Then the second half is some aggressive ejector airtime. That would be the case with any restraint, but is extra special with those roomy lap bars. It is shocking to have a restraint this minimal on a ride of this scale. The airtime is downright intense, but that's why Phantom is a top 10 coaster for me. So those are the top 35 roller coasters in all of Pennsylvania as of the end of 2022. And with Hersheypark opening a new RMC in Wildcat's Revenge later this year, this already loaded state is getting another standout coaster. What are your favorite coasters in the Keystone State? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this countdown, I would appreciate it if you gave this video a like, and you considered subscribing, because there'll be a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for watching.